Okay, hello everybody. Particularly those of you who are trying to live the nexus. Excuse me for eating nuts. That's paleo. Right now, we are going to try to put a biodigester onto the property of Dr. Sylvia Earle, the legendary National Geographic explorer, oceanographer, marine biologist, botanist, world-saving advocate. And we're working with her in her property in Dunedin, where her historic childhood home is on Lake Earle in the city of Dunedin, and hoping to build a biodigester there. So I want to show you how we'd mock that up in 3D so we can use our HTC virtual reality and experience an alternative future, a brighter, better future, when the urban and suburban environments have been rewilded and people are efficiently transforming organic residuals into fuel and fertilizer to get us off of fossil fuels and to stop contaminating our communities. So to do that, I'm in Blender 2.79b, and the first thing I do is, let me turn on the screencast keys so you can see what I'm doing. And let me actually change it so that it is, the text size is a little bigger. And let's go from the mouse icon. Yeah, the mouse icon is fine. Okay, so big letters you can see. All right, so first thing I do is I hit the X key and I delete the cube that's in there. I don't need the light, and I don't, the camera, and I don't need the light for starters. We'll add them later. But I'm using the lights and cameras from Unity, so I don't need them in Blender. Then I go to top ortho. Wow, that's a little big, isn't it? So we really don't need it to be that big for the size of the text. So let's go like that. All right, now you know where to look for it. So we're in top ortho, and I go to my GIS plugin, and once again, if you haven't been following, you get that online and you open it up and put it in user preferences called Blender GIS. So look for Blender GIS and then bring that script in. And I click on base map and Google satellite. That's what I like to work with. And I hit OK, and the map comes up, and then I hit G so that I can type in the address, which is 527 New York Avenue, Dunedin. That'll be famous as the historic Lake Earle home, childhood home of Dr. Sylvia Earle, and where there's going to be a great education center, ultimately. And I bring it down to about 19 or 20 zoom level and hit OK. And it downloads the map, and there we are. As you can see, there's Lake Earle. Bring the zoom level back again. There's Lake Earle. Sylvia's house is here, and here's where the old house is where she grew up. And this is the site of some conflict, because the owner of this condo property seems to want to create problems for Sylvia and is complaining about the vegetation that's in here as she rewilds it. It's the last space of actual sanctuary for wildlife, and they're also complaining that they've seen, oh my gosh, coyotes and snakes, which is a good thing. It's Florida. We want that wildlife, and we need these wildlife corridors that you see here, and there's so few of them now that wildlife is having a hard time surviving, can't survive on cement. So Lake Earle's property is a last remaining bastion of hope for wildlife. Look at how denuded the rest of the area is. There's a little area over here, but no corridors for the wildlife to migrate and move around. And we need these, every one of these properties that we can have rewilded. Now there's a lot of vegetation here and abundant growth because it's Florida. And because of the runoff of all of the pesticides and herbicides and chemical fertilizers that are being used by the neighbors in the surrounding area, these stupid cookie cutter lawns, there's been eutrophication of the lake, and the lake is covered in duckweed and other algae. And so the wildlife that used to be there, the wonderful turtles and fish and birds and amphibians and reptiles, are fewer and fewer, almost non-existent. in some cases. So we have a sacred obligation to protect these hot spots of biodiversity in these increasingly urban and fragmented landscapes. And you can just see it's almost all cement. And then there's a wildlife park over here, but then we've lost all that vegetation there. So that is part of what this project is about. And so we can 3D model it. And then one of the things that we want to do is we want to build a biodigester right here where the old foundation of the house still exists. That slab means we don't have to pour a slab and incur those costs. There's already a perfectly good slab right there. And then there's a chimney from the old house there that Dr. Earle has kept, not only for nostalgia, but because in the future when we make an education center on this property, that's a place where we can do barbecues and cookouts on biogas made from the vegetation. So when you're doing your, quote, weeding, and we hate that word, weed is a dirty word, but when people are removing abundant, luxurious vegetation, and whether it's aquatic from here or it's from the terrestrial, instead of hauling it off using fossil fuels and a lot of labor, all that can go in the biodigester and be turned into fuel and fertilizer for growing healthy native vegetation and even food crops here in the education center area. The main house is back under here. There's the roof, and that's where the family now lives. But this area here is perfect for an education center and wildlife. When you go in there, you're actually going into this incredible forest, sort of primeval forest. And they own all this property except for this horrid condo there and these neighboring properties here who are using the wrong kinds of fertilizers and pesticides and herbicides, which are continuing to cause problems here. So how would we do that? So the first thing we're going to do is we have our zoom, and this is a good level of it for us, and we hit E so that we get an export of that zoom. Now that will go away if I leave this program, but for right now it's there. And because I've turned on a program in user preferences called import image to places as planes, import image as planes, I do actually have a plane, which I have to turn around here. There is a plane here over the base image. The base image, if I move this over, you'll see, only shows up when I'm in the top orthographic view. If I go to perspective view, the image disappears, but because I have images as planes, it actually has made a plane over that image, which then can be manipulated, and that's where we can start placing objects on. So that's one thing that we want to do immediately. Let me line this back up. Okay, so it's centered on the X and the Y space line. And then the next thing I do, I usually hit Shift D to duplicate this plane, and then I hit M and move it to another layer so I have a backup copy of it. So down here I have my backup copy, and there's no image apart from that. Up here I have the plane, and I have, when I go to, or I should have, when I go to 7 top ortho, it appears there where it was. Okay? All right, so I've made a backup of that. Now that I have that and I've selected this region, I go to Get SRTM, which pulls in a digital elevation map, which you may know as a DEM from GIS work that you've done. It's a terrestrial map made by satellites looking down, and it picks up differences in elevation by bouncing a signal off the ground. So you wait for a few seconds for that to come in. Okay, so it took a while, but here it is. The DEM has come in. And now what we have to do is we have to get the information here on that DEM. You can see that as I look at the planes, and if I hit the 1 key, you can see the contours. You don't see the actual plane. So if you look at the actual image, and I bring it down on top of this, you see that there is a slope to Dunedin. And that slope is moving downwards toward the beach. The beach in this case is down toward the right here. And so you see the contour as the environment slopes down. And where Sylvia Earle's property is, as you can see with the DEM, it lies so that sea level, if you like, would be right where the lake is. And of course that is an indication of what would flood if the water level rose to the height of the lake, and that part of Dunedin would be flooded. So what I want to do, though, is I want to get this image to be mapped onto that. And the way that I do that is first of all, I want to make sure that nothing moved here. So I'm going to go over here and turn off layers to see. All right, and I'm going to turn back on my satellite view. Yeah, it matches up. Okay, so that's fine. And then my DEM or SRTM is there. And what I do is I select the satellite image, and I select, and I'm also going to rename it. I'm going to go to rename, and I always like to put at the beginning of these 0, 1 so it stays at the top, and I know I can work with it. And then this one here also I will rename, and I'll call it 01 SRTM DEM elevation Earle. Just to remind me that SRTM is a digital elevation map. The other one, which is on the other track, this one here, that one I'm not really concerned with because I'm not using it. That's just my backup. So going back to here and selecting the image, not selecting the image, selecting the DEM, what I then do is I'm actually going to make a copy of this, Shift D, and then I'm going to move that onto that backup track so that I have that in there. But on my regular track, I'm going to cut this up because I don't need all this information. So I'm going to select it, and I'm going to hit the Tab key to go into Edit, and then I'm going to hit A to select all. And let me go to Mesh to see the mesh by hitting Z. And then I'm going to take B for the bounding box, and I'm just going to cut most of this away. Oh, sorry about that. Let me select it again and deselect it. Now hit B. And if you look at it from the perspective of the... Isn't that interesting? It's not letting me select the whole mesh. And I should be in edit mode just like, there it is. What is going on here? That's object mode, there's edit mode. So for some reason, because I want to be able to erase the vertices and still keep it, and it's not letting me do that. So so the reason was because while it seems like it has a mesh, if I show that, that's not a real mesh. The mesh I would have to create by subdividing. So here in Tools, I'm going to click on Subdivide, 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 and make this into a mesh. There's another way to do this, by the way. I just realized. So let me go back here for a moment and go back. The other thing I can do is I can apply the modifier, because as you can see, and let me move this out of the way, as you can see here, it's got a DEM modifier that hasn't been applied, and then it has a DEM texture that hasn't been applied yet. Texture is what would give it, if I move like this, its dimension. So that's what the landscape looks like if you exaggerated it in the strength of it. That's how Dunedin's property there actually looks from that satellite view. So I have to apply that texture, and I apply it by first applying the top layer and then applying the texture. And now when I look at this in orthographic and I go to edit, now I actually have those sections there. And so I take that and I now select this half of it and hit X and delete those vertices. Oops, maybe I want to delete all those. Let me try that again. And let's keep the vertices by the edge there. So get rid of that, hit B, select the top, delete it, hit B, select that, delete it, and hit B, and select that, and delete it. So the mesh that I'm actually working with now is that mesh is like that. And if I really want to get more detailed, then I can go ahead and subdivide it. And that would be, again, in Edit, and you'd go and you would hit Subdivide. Oops, you'd have to select it first. You'd hit Subdivide and start breaking it up to give you more that you can do with it. So that gives you a lot that you can manipulate, because then if you had that subdivided, you'd be able to move stuff around, although it looks like I subdivided the satellite image, which is not what I wanted to do. So let me back out of that and try to go back to our DEM. That's the one I want to subdivide. And so I'll subdivide that by hitting Edit. And maybe it's subdivided enough. I mean, look at all that. If I hit Subdivide here, I can make an even finer mesh. What I mean by why that would be useful is because if you wanted to, for example, let me subdivide it yet one more time. If you have a really fine mesh and you want to make the part of the lake, I hit C here and have the lake actually go deeper than the DEM has shown you, then you could select the lake like this, and then you could drop it down and make a depression. So sometimes it's useful to have finer mesh points, but they use up more memory. So there's that to consider. This is good though, the mesh that I've created here for our purposes now. So now what I have to do is I have to select that DEM, which is selected, and I go to unwrap it in UV editing. And here I hit my 7 for top, my 5 for ortho, and zoom out. And then I go into edit mode, as you can see, and I deselect. Now I reselect everything. And now what we have is we have that projected, and we want to pick an image to go behind it. So the image that I'm picking is the export Google satellite. Oh, that one isn't the right one. Let's try this one here. Okay. Then, since it's not matching, what I'll do is I'll click on this and I'll click on this and scale it and move it with the G key and try to scale it out so that it covers that image. So now I'm going to scale in X and I'm going to scale it a bit in Y. And move it into the center here and scale it again. Oops, scale it again in Y and scale it in X. So I'm getting some distortions here. And when I do that, now when I go to my default view and I turn off the Google map, you will be able to see that now, let me go out of this and go out of edit. So now the image is on the elevation. And you can see that Dunedin is not even, and that the lake is a bit deeper in there. So we have some digital elevation information in that. Not super exaggerated, but there it is. And I'm going to save. Save this as Lake Earle and put it in my sample scenes folder under scenes. Yeah, I think that's where I want it. It's in the, so why not sample scenes? Maybe I put it just under scenes. Ah, okay. And I'll make a new folder for it, and I'm going to call it Lake Earle VR Assets. save this blend in there. The other thing now that I need to do is I need to texture this, because this will show up in my Blender, but that doesn't give me something that I can export with. So there's a couple of things I need to do here. I go back to UV editing, and this image, the Google Sat that I'm using for this image, is now going to be exported, save as image, and I'm going to save it not in the temp folder, because that's where the UV window created it. I'm going to go into my folder that I just created, which is VR test, and in assets, and then in scenes, and then Lake Earle assets. And I'm going to save this, but I'm going to give it a name, and the name is going to be Lake Earle texture. Okay, so there's my Lake Earle texture, and I save that image as that. And now I go to the default window, and I look at this level that I have, and I go to materials, and I create a new material. And just so I have a material to go with it, I'm going to create this in a sort of dark blue, and I'm going to call this Lake Earle property material. And then, having that, I'm going to get rid of the specular so there's no shine. I'm going to go to texture, create a new texture for it, and that texture is going to come out of the image that I created, the Lake Earle texture. And that means that when I look at this from a texture point of view, you see the texture on there. If I go to render it, it's dark because I don't have any lights. So I'm going to put in a light just for viewing it. But in material and render, it doesn't show up, but in texture it does. So the material's not showing up until I put a light in the scene. So let me hit 1 to look at this orthogonally from the front. And let me add a lamp. I'll add the sun. And where did the sun go? I'm going to lift the sun up and put the sun in the south and rotate it so that it's sort of what the sun does, and also go to the view here and move it over so that it's shining in. And eventually you can put the sun in its exact azimuth, and I'm not doing that here. But that means that now when I look at it as a material, you can see the texture show up, and you can even see some shadows from the light. Now what I'll do is I will go and see if it shows up in rendered. Yes, it does, because I have the light. All right. So you could begin to take pictures, except that if I hit F12 to take a picture, there's no camera found, and you have to have a camera in the scene. So let me put a camera where I would like to see a view of this. And probably the camera view I would like is this one here. And the way that you turn your view into a camera, what I do is I use Control-Alt-0. So pick the view that you want to see, then press Control-Alt-0, and we haven't even put the camera in, so dar. Put in a camera. There's the camera there. It's not looking in the right place. If you hit 0, you see what the camera sees. The camera sees nothing so far, so we don't want to look at that. So we, again, find the view that we want, and once you've got the view that you like, then hit Control-Alt-0, and then you can start to move that camera. Now, one of the problems with the camera that you will find is that when you're looking at your view and you hit 0, sometimes you see nothing and you think, why? I'm actually looking right at the lake. It's what I wanted to see, so why am I not seeing the lake? Well, it's because you have this thing called clipping. So when you go to the camera here, you'll see clipping start and end, and it usually is set by default to end at 100. I find you need about 5,000. Maybe a little more. Maybe we'll go for 8,000. And maybe even a little more. Let's see. Nope, that's the end of the view anyway. So 8,000 is certainly sufficient. It's just we don't have all that much of Dunedin represented here. But another way you set your cameras is you can open up these windows from these drag bars, and you can look at the camera view in one of the windows, and in the other you can manipulate the camera and rotate it on the z-axis, for example, lift it up a little bit. So you can play around with it like that. And then once you have your camera set and you have a camera view and you have a light in the scene, you can hit F12 and it renders the scene, and you can save that image as a camera render if you want to. You can also do animations. But right now I'm interested in placing the camera so that it can look at, hit the escape key, so it can look at the place where we're going to build the biodigester, and rotate this in Z. Make it straight on, move it like that, move it there, and let's tilt down by rotating in X, and then move it forward. So that location is where we want to place the biodigester. And let me save this. All right, so to place the biodigester, we need the model of the biodigester. When I'm importing, I always go to a separate track, a separate layer. Now here we have in our Facebook group, if you go to PCGS, no, it's not going to PCGS, go to Blending Realities. This is the Facebook group that I'm using for creating Utopia by blending the virtual and the real. It's an open group that I, as administrator, admit people in. I put an STL file of the Puxin biodigester in here, in the files section, add files. So if you were to type into the group Puxin, then you can see, for example, an animation that I did at one point. Oh, it disappeared. So that post, there it is, that I was working on. But you'll also see the STL file, which is right there. And you can download that. And when it downloads, grab it, show in folder, copy that STL file, bring it into Blender Tutorials, and well, actually that's not where we have stuff. It's actually in Masters Sustainability, in the Blender GIS, no, in Unity, and in Assets, and then in Scenes, and then in Lake Earle Assets, and we'll paste it there. So we have that to work with. You then come in here and you go File, Import, and it's an STL. So do we have this? Yes, there's STL. So there's the STL there, and you bring it in, and there's the digester. And we can zoom in on it by hitting 1. There's no lights in here, so I can't see it, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to Shift D to copy it, and then I'm going to move a copy of it onto that first layer, and go to my first layer, and there it is. But where did it show up? Well, we need to move it, so we can find it here, and if we hit the period key here, it should zoom in on it. So somewhere it's in the middle of the jungle here. So let me lift it up, and up there it is. And what's really cool is it seems to be the right size, more or less. And that's fun. So I'm going to move this digester to here, and let me go back to my camera view here. That's what my camera sees. And take the biodigester and put it on the ground. And if I hit 7, then I get, it will go somewhere like here, although it looks a bit big relative to the size of the property, because it's really supposed to be 9 feet by 9 feet, and we'll get into how to measure later on, but it's looking a bit large, and we'd have to bring in a person by comparison. So I'm going to shrink it down with the S key just a bit, and before I do that, see that little dot there that's the geometry origin, and it's off to the side, which makes things inconvenient. So I'm going to go to Object and Transform and turn the origin to the geometry so it's right in the center. So now when I scale it, I've scaled it down in a uniform way and then plop it on the ground. That's probably more like the height that it would be for such a digester. And again, we'll have to get actual objects and get the measurements going. So we do have now a bit of digester in there, and we need to give it a material. The material should be, click here, click here. The digester's concrete gray, but the one that we have at Rosebud Continuum is a kind of brick orange, which I like actually, so it looks good against the green, so I'll make it look like the one that we have there. Specular is okay to have here. In Specular, if I turn off Specular, there's no shine, you see? You can see it on this ball there, and you can see it on the digester. If I bring up the intensity of it, it has some shine. It reflects sunlight. And that's good for an object like that. You don't put Specular on the landscape, but you do put it on objects. And there's the Puxin digester. It also has should have some subcomponents, which would be interesting, like the gas holder that's in there. Whoops. The gas holder is a different color. It's usually gray. So what you would do there is you'd select your model and you go Tab to Edit, and then you can look down on it and select some vertices here, and then you should be able to go Select, or it should be in here, Select Linked, and there we go. So it's a separate object. So once that's all linked, then I can take off. Oops, I need to go then to Object. So I have to make it a separate object. So it's what's linked, and you make it a separate object by hitting Alt-P, I believe it is. No, not Alt-P. Is it P? Yeah, Separate by Selection. Now that becomes a separate object. And when I hit Tab out of it, I'm in just that. See, just that gas holder now is its own separate object. And so now I can get rid of the texture for that there and give it a new texture, which is I'll also use a bluish gray. Okay. And that's how the gas holder for the Puxin works. And you can do that for anything else that you want to change the color of. But I think that's helpful to have that. And I think what's cool too is that now we can teach people and say, okay, look, this is the gas holder that has to be put in, although this other part here should be parented to it. So let me hit Tab again. Oops, not that. Let me select the whole digester there and hit Tab. And then let me select a point here and again go Select Linked. And that part there needs to be separated by hitting P by selection. And now this part here, when I click on it, that part is a separate part. I'm going to give it its own material and make it yellowish white so we can distinguish it. That's the gas out pipe. And I am going to parent it to the dome because it's part of the dome. So actually what I need to do, I need to rename these things. This is called gas holder dome, and this part here is called gas out fitting pipe, and that helps me out here. This one here is the Puxin digester, and this one here is the one that I think that we have in our other layer. So I'll just keep that as it is, and I'll turn it off. I don't need to see that. So now I go to the gas out fitting pipe, and I say I want you to be parented to the digester. So if I hit that and then shift right click on the gas holder dome, and then I hit Control P, I set the parent to the object and keep transform. So now what happens is if I click just on this, I can raise it to show people that it's a separate piece. If I click on the dome and move it, it moves the parented object with it. So I can lift that up and show people how it goes in. The other thing I want to be able to do is I don't want to move the digester and have the dome remain. So I need to parent the dome to the digester. So what I did, again, if you're looking at my figures, I'm clicking on the dome, then I'm right shift clicking on the digester, then I'm hitting P, oops, not P, Control P, and then set parent to the object to keep the transform so it doesn't get any bigger or smaller. Now I have the ability to click on the Puxin digester. Oh, I see. It's there. If you look over here, it's all parented. So the Puxin digester is there. It includes the Puxin model of the body, which came from that file. Then there's a gas dome, and parented to the gas dome is the gas fitting pipe. So if I only click on the gas fitting pipe, I can remove that, move it in and out. You see. But if I click on the gas holder dome and move it, then the pipe moves with it. And if I click on the actual digester now and move it, then everything moves with it. That's the idea of parenting, that the major object, the parent, drags its children with it, but the children do have independent motion, and then their children have independent motion if you want to there. So that's the idea of parenting. And now I only need to click on the digester and I can move it down onto the landscape where I want to, and now hit save. All right. So having that, we can now move into Unity to see how we would get that object and the landscape into a game. So I'm going to pause now and start a new tutorial.